Hi, Baby and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River, make sure you are wide awake, and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hi, folks. So glad you're joining us again today for another sweet edition and broadcast of the 1950s Fun Chat. We just love doing these, Jackie, because look at all the wonderful history we're learning about from that decade of the 1950s. So how can you lead us into the program today?
Well, indeed, I certainly agree with you about learning so much from our guests. Well, today, I would ask our viewers to look on the bottom and notice that purple banner that's across the bottom. That's our website, and we would appreciate if you would go there because you'll find out all sorts of information. It's at www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. There you will find information on the book and our events, the authors, the vendors, and of course this 1950s Fun Chat. This is number 117. So if you'd like to spend a day looking at our fun chats, start with 1 or 17 or pick a few out. You'll find out some very interesting information. Also on the page, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner the book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. And it was published in April of 2021. The next year of April 22, we received a little award. If you look up in the right-hand corner there, you'll see a little white dot, and that indicates the award from the Independent Press. It is the Independent Press Award for regional nonfiction, and it was titled The Distinguished Favorite. So please check out the book. But in the meantime, without further ado, as people have said, I'd like to introduce you to Jessie Veeder Schofield. She was born in 1983 on her parent family's ranch in western North Dakota, McKenzie County, near Watford City, and raised on that ranch. The ranching tradition is continuing in that Jessie and her husband Chad are raising their 2 daughters on their family's ranch. Jessie earned a BA in communications from the University of North Dakota. She assisted in the development of the Long X Arts Foundation at Watford City, North Dakota, and now serves as its director. Jessie is a singer, songwriter, and has been a contributor to a weekly column in Fargo Forum affiliated newspapers for over 10 years. The column concentrates on rural living, community, and parenthood. So next month, which is December 2023, her 5th original album, Yellow Roses, will be released. Jessie, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, ladies.
Thank you. We're glad you're here. Mm-hmm. So even though you were not born in the 1950s, it is likely that you were influenced by your family members who experienced that decade. So will you please share a few incidences or stories that have made a difference in your life? And there is touch on the importance of sharing family stories.
Sure. Well, I've built a career on sharing family stories, and I've been writing music and poetry and telling stories about it since I was a little kid. The thing about being on a generational ranch, we're the 4th generation, raising the 5th generation on this place, is that you're surrounded by memories and relics and stories that sometimes are not your own and are not your own memories and not your own relics and not your own stories. So I was always fascinated by things that people left behind here. And I still am. I think we, especially Midwesterners in North Dakota, we kind of have this connection to the landscape because it's such a harsh place to live and exist. Mm-hmm. And there are so many people that came before us that had to work really hard and sacrifice really hard and to make it work. And so Chad and I, my husband Chad and I, never take for granted all of the things, all of the sacrifices, all of the hardships that had to be overcome for us to be here on this almost 110-year-old ranch. So you're asking for sort of tidbits, but I think as a kid growing up, there's a few things that come to mind where the past sort of comes and haunts you, and you learn a little bit about what life might have been like. My grandma we're on my dad's place where my dad was raised. So he's raised on a homestead place. Great grandpa Eddie homesteaded this place. And so he had a lot of equipment that he left, in giving, they'd pass on from generation to generation. So us kids would just have fun exploring that, my cousins and my sisters and I. And everyone, I think my age, has a story about pretending that the old threshing machine was a ship or a dinosaur.
Oh, yes.
And hoping
Yes.
that, getting in underneath that old threshing machine, getting in, not maybe understanding exactly how it worked, or we knew what it did, but in our imagination, so many things on this place turned into other things. And the threshing machine still is there doing the same thing for my kids all of these years later. And down where we've put our house, it used to be an old car graveyard. We moved a lot of them out now, but we would go down into this little nook and cranny of the place and sit in these old cars from the 50s, and maybe some of them even as early as the 20s and 30s, and kind of make our own stories up about what these cars were and who they were, what they were to people in our lives. And then later on, learned a little bit more about them. And so we have an old Ford pickup, international pickup, that is kind of symbolizes Grandpa Eddie. That was his pride and joy. And so you never knew these people that came I never got a chance to meet great Grandpa Eddie, but because of some of the things he left behind, I have some fond memories, or feel like I maybe knew him. And then my mom is another person who's really influenced me and her parents. She was born in the 50s, and she had 3 sisters. And so I learned a lot from them and their stories about what it was like to grow up as a woman in that time. And my grandma being kind of, we just lost her this year. She just was almost 90 years old, but raising 3 daughters during a time of sort of revolution and trying to, take charge of your life and your career. She was a working woman, and raising those daughters. So I always looked up to her and to my aunts, who really maybe broke the mold a little bit in their life, and showing us how to be a leader and how to follow your passion. So I have some good influences when it comes to sharing a little bit about what the past was like, so we can kind of move forward into the future. So
Jessie, do you recall a story that your grandma would have told you about life in the 50s? What it was like for her?
Yeah, let me think on that a little bit. My grandma Ginny was really a cool lady. I spent a lot of time with her. She was adopted, and her and her sister were adopted, and she was brought into a family when she was an infant who her dad was a baker. And so she had really cool stories about growing up in that bake shop and having customers come in. And my mom has really fond memories of that too, in a neighborhood setting. She grew up in Grand Forks, which is totally different experience than where my dad was raised. And my dad was raised out here before there was really running water too. I mean, I can't even imagine that, being in this place, and they had an outhouse, and they had, that sort of experience. But my grandma, what I always thought was interesting is that she did go to college, and she said a lot of women in that time would go to college maybe more looking for a husband. And that just didn't resonate exactly with what we were told growing up and how you pursued your education. And she did, but she married her high school sweetheart. And they've been married almost 60 years before she passed away. But she wanted to be a Phi Ed teacher. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I think she stopped short of that, but she was really involved in Girl Scouts of America as well. And so she had a lot of leadership tendencies and qualities. And also, she worked in family health, and she was really, really an advocate of the birth control pill. And that really changed a lot in their lives in raising 4 daughters. So she talked kind of candidly about that and what that meant for her, just worrying about her daughters getting, the education and the life they deserved.
So she did not grow up in the West then?
No, my grandma Jeannie didn't.
Okay, and what was it like for her to go west with her beloved?
My mom. My mom. So Grandma Jenny and Grandpa Bill, they spent their entire lives out in east and raised their daughters.
I
My
see.
mom married a cowboy.
All
And
right.
yeah, she had a young daughter, my older sister Lindsay, and my dad adopted her and moved out to the ranch. That's where my dad always wanted to be. They met in Grand Forks. So I have funny stories, my mom too, about what it was like to go from being a single mom, a divorced mom with a young child, kind of existing with her girlfriends and running a business. She's a dancer and a social worker. That's how my parents met. And then taking and marrying this cowboy musician. My dad's a musician as well. And he brought her all the way out west to drive on hills she's never driven on. And they had party lines out here at that time.
Yes.
So she was like, where am I? What is this place? And was raised in a kind of a different environment. So I think some of her first impressions were with the church. We had really small country rural churches and still do. And being asked to bring, a baked item to the church on her days on Sundays, and maybe not being the best baker and having like one of the church ladies sort of hover over her and bring something just in case she or didn't do it or whatever. But the party line thing was really a shock to her, not being able to just pick up the phone and call her girlfriend. And but what mom is, she's never been, the typical ranch woman. She's not on a horse with us. Like we just shipped calves and sold calves yesterday and then preg checked yesterday, the day before. But she really knew this was the environment in which she wanted to raise her kids. And she grew to love it and appreciate it and bloom where she was planted. And I think that's been really a resiliency that she got from her parents. And in that time, they just kind of pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and really supported one another. And both my mom's side and my dad's side, there was, you worked hard and you just persevered. And my mom's always been she's maybe closer, she's born in 52, 53, a person who's always had her own business. So it kind of reminds me of you two ladies, and hearing your talk and your sisterhood, she had that. And it sort of my mom reminds me of your story and your bond that she has to her sisters, every single one of them being completely different. But my mom would do backyard babysitting and dance classes. So since she was like 11 years old, and I wasn't raised very long in a city environment, but I did have a little bit of that when we lived in Grand Forks. But I just envision her kind of being the hub for the neighborhood kids in that time and coming in her backyard, getting dance classes. And she always was an entrepreneur. She said she didn't even really play with dolls. She just got to business. So she brought that into my life. And I know sometimes I blame her for all of the things that I think are my hobbies and I turn into a business. It's her fault.
That's amazing that she started this backyard business at age 11.
Yeah, she was very young. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Had she had dance lessons herself, or she just started going with what she thought was a great?
No, her parents did take her to dance lessons. And I recall her telling me that her dad would drive her pretty far to get to those dance lessons. And dance and ballet were big, and you ladies talked about that in your lives too, were a huge part of her upbringing, a big part of her life. And she has a funny story about her dance teacher wanted her to be involved in a sport like track or something. When girls could do some sports, and track was one of them in the high school. And she hated it. And so, but she didn't have any tennis shoes, because it's not like today where you have 7,000 pairs of shoes. My daughters are rummaging. Do you want your boots? Do you want your pretty shoes? Do you want your tennis shoes? We were that way too, a little bit more, but she had nice shoes for school and ballet slippers, and she ran in ballet slippers.
Oh my goodness.
And then she had one of her friends come and pick her up. I think this was in high school. So they would run where they were out of sight, and then one of her girlfriends would come pick her up, drive her around, and drop her off. Just like not doing track.
And she was out of breath.
She was, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So funny. Those are little snippets of how times have changed, what you couldn't get away with.
Yes. I want to go back to where you talked about the relics on your ranch and these old cars
and the stories that they could tell.
Mm-hmm.
Had you created a story at all about maybe one of those cars from the 50s and how it played a part in your family's life?
Yeah, well, my dad would tell me, and I don't know specifically if that car wound up in the the graveyard of cars that we would play in. And I don't remember specifically the make and model, because I'm not that type of woman who remembers things like that.
Okay.
But it was some sort of station wagon. And I think, back in when my dad was being raised, you didn't go to town. We're 30 miles from town. And when he was being raised out here, it wasn't paved. It was all gravel. And so the idea that you would get to take a ride and drive into town, they went to country school, was a big deal. And you just took care of your things. And having something like a car like that, a fancy car, and fancy to them was not fancy to everybody else, right, was a big deal. But what I like to think about when I would come down into this relic where the relics lived down where our house is now is my uncles. So my great Grandma Gudrun was a Norwegian immigrant. She happened to be raised right down the road from the homestead, the Veeder homestead. So my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side were neighbors, actually. They're kind of far apart in age, about 7-8 years, but they were raised next to each other. But my grandma Edith, my dad's mom, had 11 brothers and sisters, and they're big, strong Norwegian men in that family, and they got into trouble. And so dad's talked to me about, great people, wonderful people, but yeah, I mean, some of them were really wild. Thinking about and a lot of people know this name, Lynn Linseth was a big cowboy in this area, and was in the military, and had some major ranks in the military. Anyway, when my grandma was raising her kids, sometimes my dad would remember the uncles coming to spend the night, at their sister's house, and maybe pull in a car that they might have wrecked or got in a fight down to live its life out and its wrecked life out on the ranch. And so some of those cars, I imagine my great uncles driving and getting into trouble and parking them there, but they couldn't run anymore. So there's always some little family stories that come up with those memories attached to these vehicles.
Did many folks in that area, did they enlist in the service, or were they drafted?
My dad, well, I think all of my uncles, most all my uncles and my grandma or my grandpa were all enlisted servicemen. Yeah, I don't think they at that time. Well, now this is going back into settlement days, but my great grandpa Eddie was young when he was settling this ranch, and he proved his parents' ranch up when he was only like 13 or 14 years old, because his dad was blind. And so he helped prove that up with his brother. And then you have to be a certain age to settle a place, but this place he settled or put paperwork on in about 1914, 1915, went off to war, and then came back and settled with his brother. Wow. And then the idea that, and actually you mentioned my album, so I'll mention it. This isn't, but we're talking about sense of place and being on a place that's been here for generations through generations is really on my mind, especially as I get a little bit older and I'm raising my kids. So I have a song, and the album's titled for the song Yellow Roses, which is my great grandpa Eddie's story and how he made it and raised his kids here. His wife died when she was only 36 years old. And in her garden, she planted yellow roses, and they still bloom today. And it's been fun. So that idea of resiliency, I think, you think about the 30s and how they would have had to persevere, and what he would have had to done right or wrong, or what happened out here when people couldn't make it. And the fact that this man, I hear stories about him, and he raised 5 kids on his own with a little bit of help from the neighbor girls that would have been my grandma Edie's sisters. And how community came together at that time, and how you needed it out in a rural place. You couldn't exist in a vacuum alone, and how they built their lives out here in their communities. But the idea of yellow roses still blooming in those lilac bushes out here on a ranch where I'm raising my kids all these years later is such a symbol for me for perseverance and sticking through it in this rural community. A lot of your book is about that. It's North Dakota is the middle of nowhere, and out being in the middle of nowhere has its own, generational stories that can only be told from the people or understood from the people who lived it. So.
And they're beautiful stories because it's so unique.
Yes, it is. And I think even now, pushing forward to being in a boomtown where I was raised in the 90s, in a time of really, it was a volatile economic time. Nobody around here had any money. My dad was running a ranch that was in debt. His parents, he lost when we were really young. And the idea that you are trying, and he worked as an economic development director, a musician, and we all have like 6 jobs, right, out on the ranch. I still do, and because of my mom. It's in my blood. You have 47. But the idea that some of that sticks with you generationally because you've seen it, that, when you're making a decision to even put a permanent structure on the ranch was something that was hard for my dad to say. What if you have to sell it? You can't sell the place, but how could you get that house off if something, if economic times were tough? And the idea that we would have a thriving community, in 2023, where young families are coming to this area reminds me a little bit of maybe what was happening in the boom times and the settlement times. We have so many people coming, but you don't know how this is going to play out but trying to tell the story of what it really means to live here through every generation is, my dad would always say, you have to be honest about the idea that there's opportunity, but can you survive a winter? Can you be this rural? Can you be this far away from a target? Like in these times, you have to be realistic so that you're setting people up to have success here. And I think we saw a lot of people have, come through these generations where I'm just reading Laura Ingalls Wilder books with my daughters and thinking about how you would even survive as people here in these winters that are just trying to break you. Even now with modern conveniences, it's really tough. So I'm always have my hand and my mind into the past and thinking about then how we build a future in rural communities for our kids. So
how would you? What considerations do you have thinking of your daughters?
Yeah.
And are they? Do you think that they will be interested in being the 5th generation who lives on the ranch?
That's always the hope. And I think that's the hope that my dad had I have 2 sisters, an older sister and a younger sister. My younger sister lives right over the hill and has 2 daughters as well. So we are raising, I have a 7-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old daughter. She has a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter. My oldest sister actually lives in town and is helping run a business with my mom. So the idea that we would all 3 girls be in Western North Dakota, in a town we were raised in that was 1,200 people in the whole county. And we were told to leave because there wasn't anything for us here because it was so hard. Our parents wanted what my parents' parents wanted for them, a better life, an easier life. And agriculture in a small environment, rural environment, wasn't something that they had a lot of faith in that was going to keep bringing young people back. So it's been unprecedented that our community would have boomed the way it is, and unprecedented that we would have all our family here. So just saying that, I've been really, really blessed to be able to be involved in community development from when the oil boom sort of struck us in 2010, where everyone was coming from all over the world to see if they could make it. I stood in those strategic planning meetings and wrote things down and was involved in leadership because I thought, I'm going to be here forever now. I can't leave once I move home. I'm not leaving. This is where we want to be. How can we make it work? And for me as an artist and a writer and a musician, it was through the arts that I could make some differences. And then I saw other community members do the same thing. And so you asked me specifically what that looks like. I think it is building that community with a plethora of opportunities for young families to connect. And in this world where we can talk like this on a screen and be connected with the world, it's more important than ever to find ways for people to connect on a human level, on a face-to-face level, and to kind of process through their experiences as being humans in this kind of tricky political, just this world we're living in where we know too much all the time.
That's right.
I see that in the arts and I see that in storytelling. And so what we're building in our community is safe spaces for people to create together, community events. I think Watford City and Mackenzie County have done a great job of creating community spaces and programs for youth. We have young families that have come here from all over the world. And we just had a cultural fair that featured 20, almost 30 different cultures that are represented in Mackenzie County. And so celebrating other cultures as well as the history of this place is really important. And I think I see that as my biggest role in the arts and our organization is to cherish and honor the people who came before us, who built this place in which we exist, but not to discount what it means to have people coming from other places, other cultures, other ethnicities, other life experiences, and saying, welcome to our community. What can we learn from you? How can we do this better so that our kids can grow up and love the place in which they were raised, but feel like they have a basis that they understand the world and they can go out in it confidently. And what I want for my daughters is to know that they can always come home again, but we want to give them the basis of what it means to exist in a community and be helpful and know and really bring with them what it means to exist in a community is what we were raised doing. And what I hope to be doing an okay job in raising my daughters is community service, is being involved, is going to the things, is a soccer program doesn't run on bots and Facebook pages. A soccer program runs on human bodies giving their Saturdays to teach these kids how to play soccer. And that's something I want my kids to understand, what public service is and what it means to be in a thriving community. So leading by example that way. But boy, there's so much opportunity here that I didn't have as a kid. They can be in swimming. They can play soccer. They just can do whatever they want to do. And I just hope that we give them a good experience on the ranch, that they would see themselves raising their own kids here. Although we have to keep them safe. We bring them along, we brought them along to ride horses and gather cattle this last couple of days. And my youngest daughter fell off her pony and kind of a little wreck. And I'm like, oh God, is she never going to want to ride horse again? All these memories are good for their memoir as long as we can survive it.
Yeah. So Jessie, you mentioned the arts, and I know you are involved in the arts, but let's go specifically. What is the Long X Arts Foundation?
So we founded the Long X Arts Foundation as like a little small grassroots idea that came out of strategic planning during the oil boom. We didn't have an arts organization when I was growing up in the 90s in Watford City. I was a working musician by the time I was 16 years old. I had an album. So I kind of learned what it meant to be a musician in a small town. And it meant a lot of flatbed trailer performances and doing it for free and doing it to get experience. And then I went out in the world and saw what other small communities, because I toured a lot, were doing to uphold the arts and how it kind of just elevated their town and their sense of place. So when I came back home, I thought, well, I don't know how to do a lot of things, but I know how to tell a story and I know how to help give people an experience in the arts. And so we explored that with what my neighbor who you talked to, Jan Dodge, was raised alongside of my dad out here. So we're neighbors. And he was, so she was really interested in it as well. So long story short, the Long X Arts Foundation didn't break a mold on what an arts foundation does, but it's the first one that we have in this community in this area. So we just specialize in supporting artists in our community and providing just really high-class entertainment opportunities for people who, for example, we're having a classical pianist come tonight from to perform from, I think he might even be from New York, but bringing them through during a concert series so that people in our rural community don't have to go to New York to see a cool act, to see a classical pianist artist or to see an act, we can bring it to them. And we can also teach our kids art classes after school for those kiddos that maybe don't play basketball or want a well-rounded artsy and also are sporty. Like, let's do that in North Dakota small towns. Let's really elevate that experience for them. And we do special events as well as trying to get community theater moving forward. So anything in the arts, anything that we can do to elevate an experience through the arts, whether it's public art and murals and statues or art in the park events or events where we can have artists come and show and sell their work, we're all about it. So we've grown. You came and visited us in our gallery space. We've had a lot of support from the community there, and it's been a lot of fun. It connects with what I do as a musician that still travels regionally and knows a lot of just musicians and art connections. I can bring it back and give back.
Yeah, so for those people who didn't listen last week, tell us about what Long X to what it refers.
Long X, it's hard to say, kind of Long X Arts Foundation, but we have the Long X Trail that ends here in Watford City, North Dakota, which is part of the Great Western Trail that came up from Texas up into North Dakota and into Canada. So we're a branch of that Great Western Trail. And Long X is the Longhorn kind of vision that we have in our national park right next to, we're right next to the north unit of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And it's kind of just the brand of Western culture in our community, which we are. We're still cowboys and oil and the Badlands and farming and ranching are really part of our brand here. So,
Jessie, is McKenzie County unique in North Dakota for what you are doing with culture and bringing back generations of ranching families or farm families, of rural families?
I think it's unique only in that we have what we have no control over, the economics. We have the jobs here. And I think when I was growing up, that wasn't the case. So we had a windfall. We had an anomaly happen in Western North Dakota where oil's here. We have oil and we can get to it. And we have some rich farming country and rich ranching country. We're right on the edge of the river. We're the island empire, McKenzie County. But the fact that we have these minerals under the earth, 10,000 feet is something that really has changed everything for our community. So I will speak to that because this is an image that I have in my head. When I was growing up in the 90s, I graduated 2001. I was really, 17 years old, really thinking about sense of place and what it would mean to leave this place. And I saw the aging out of a community before my eyes. I saw young people leave and not come back, which I paid attention to because I loved this place so much. I wanted to come back here and I wanted to raise my kids here. I knew it. I knew at 17 I needed to go. And I also knew at 17 I might not ever come back here because what do you do when you come back? Where do you work? How do you make a living? I saw it happen with, my parents and my friends' parents. There's only so much to choose from in terms of jobs. Well, that was before, access to internet on your phone and you can work from anywhere. So you couldn't even envision what it might look like to exist in a rural community at that time, the way we exist now. I can be a musician. You can be authors. You can connect with people. I'm sitting in the 30 miles from town with a internet connection, which by the way, I didn't have when I moved back home 10 years ago. Yeah. So it's changed a lot, but I think, so the image of me leaving, and I wrote songs about this, and all of these porch lights in these rural communities, in these farming and ranching areas, I just saw them in my head going out one by one by one, because I didn't see us figuring out a way for young people to come back. The world's changed now, and I think it's, but what I didn't see is that, next door up the road, mile and a half, my best friend that I was raised alongside, she's raising her 4 kids on her family's place. Down the road, someone's doing the same thing. They're popping a house up over the hill. We're bringing families back because there's a diversification of jobs and opportunity and a beautiful community to raise your kids in. I think North Dakota is doing a really good job with that now. And I also think because times are changing. I think especially after the pandemic, people are thinking, maybe I want to go back to something a little simpler. Maybe I want to live in a small town. And now it's our job in North Dakota in rural communities to say, hey, yeah, here's what we have for you. Come over here. We have great schools, small class sizes. We have all these nostalgic things that, we all kind of keep. Some of that's still here in rural North Dakota, and some in Watford's changed, but people will say it still feels like a small town. And I think that is unique. And we have, great neighbors. If we can continue to be good neighbors, that's the key. So.
With all the different people who have come to Watford City, North Dakota to live due to all the economic progress that has been made in McKenzie County, are you aware if there's one thing that they point out why they like living in Watford City area?
100% of the time, if you like it here, the first thing they say is the people. It really, really is. And I think that's probably not unique to every place. I mean, I think that's probably the big thing. If you feel like you belong and that people are welcoming you, then you can overlook a lot of problems, or you feel like you can be involved in the solution, that you're welcome to the table. And if we can continue that trend, I think we're going to be okay as a community. But boy, I'm older than average in Watford City now. I'm 40 years old. Now I'm way older than average. Average family or average adult is about 33. 32.
Huh. Oh, young community. In a rich old setting.
Yeah. And the thing is, I have to give props to the city and the county and the community leaders that really saw, we want people to stay here. We don't want this to be a boom town where they come in and then they leave. What can we do to bring families here? The arts was my hand up saying that could help. And then other people said, well, let's do good parks. Let's do a walking path. Let's do community centers. Let's keep doing these community events, which I think everyone's nostalgic for. We all remember the street dances or the dances that community members would have in their barns or their community halls. I think that idea that you gather in the name of music and dancing and festivity happened in 1910, in 1920, 30, 40, 50, all the way here. That's the same. That remains the same. We need to continue to value that as much as we have in the past. We've got more distracted. But when people come together at the
and it is a way to get to know the people in a different setting.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the point was with this cultural fair. Like, it can be hard to talk about community and culture and differences and politics. That's scary territory, especially for like local staunch Norwegian, we want to not hurt anyone's feelings. We don't want to ruffle feathers. We don't want to stir the pot. But when you bring in a potluck to a big community center and you say, look at this we had beautiful Native American dancers from the MHA Nation. We had Filipino dancers. We had Hispanic Mexican dancers, beautiful cultures that you can look and see, oh yeah, they're not different than we are. This is how they celebrate. Same thing, food, music, festivity. We can come and we can ask questions in a safe place. That's kind of been my goal through the arts. And I think that's just community. That's being a welcoming community.
So is the community then being exposed to cultural foods as well?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Of course, I was managing all the dancers. So someone asked me, I was really busy. Someone asked me, what foods did you eat? And I was like, lefse. That was the only thing I had that day. And I've had it 1,000 times. And it's not because I didn't want to. I just didn't get to it. But yeah, they celebrate with actually, it's the students that did it. Arts Foundation just had some money and could provide some support. And then did the dancing. But they organized with their foreign exchange students and the community, like I said, 26 to 30, I think, different cultures represented. And they all made a little piece of like a sample of food and drink. So,
Jessie, we're nearing the end of our program.
You didn't know what you were getting into when you asked.
We put a nickel in and there you went.
Yeah, there I went.
Your enthusiasm is so contagious. If you could, like, on one area that you think in McKenzie County, North Dakota, keeps the population from generation to generation to generation coming back? What one thing would that be?
I think to go back to what we initially talked about, which is sense of place. And I think that's what you women are writing about. That's what I write about every week for 10 years. What my music is about. I think there are people that have been affected so much, and I'm going to speak to our ranch, but I think it also works within Watford City and our small towns across North Dakota, where they've had an experience here on our place. Either they were raised here for a short amount of time or they came to visit, and they've gone on to the rest of the world. They've done their thing and they come back and they say, yeah, I've lived in New Mexico or Idaho and Canada, but this is my home. And it's not in everyone's heart, but with the people who get it, something connects with them, something ignites in them. If it's the landscape, if it's the people, if it's the memories associated, that's what brings people here. And that's what makes you write about it. That's what brings you home. And so for whatever reason, this place got in my guts and in my blood when I was very, very young. And my dad's the same way. A lot of people in this community say that very same thing. Despite the harshness of landscape and weather, there's something about it that becomes you. And I hear it from people with the thickest Southern accent say the very same thing. I heard it from a woman who teaches Mexican folkloric dance she has to move back to be with her family, but with tears in her eyes, she says, place has felt like home to me. And we need to pay attention to that and keep writing about it and exploring it and hoping that that continues for generations.
Jessie, where can viewers learn of your music or hear you?
Well, I'm the only Jessie Veeder. So if you Google me, but I write a column every week. I put it on my website. So my music is on jessieveedermusic.com. My writing is on veederranch.com. So I'm
Veeder, correct?
Right.
Jessie Veeder, Veeder. So folks, please take a listen to her music, and her songs are just so touching. So we hope you will connect with Jessie in that way. Jessie, thank you so very much for being our guest. What an inspiration you are. Watford City and McKenzie County they are blessed to have you there and being such a wonderful representative of what life's like in ranching and in Western North Dakota. Thank you so much for being here.
Janine and Jackie. I love what you're doing, and I love the sister power. So thanks for
sister power. Yay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Jackie,
yes,
can you show?
I would just like to remind our viewers to check those colors in front of you. You have a red subscribe button. Please touch that. And a blue thumbs up button. Please touch that. And we hope you'll join us again for another time. And tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s fun chat. Till next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.